Damian Sarkis sat in first-class seat 1A of the international flight, his jaw clenched so tight that the muscles in his neck bulged against the intricate tattoos crawling up from his collar. For 2.5 hours, his baby daughter had been screaming a raw, relentless sound that shattered the suffocating silence of fear blanketing the entire cabin. Every passenger who recognized the tattoos, the tailored suit that couldn't quite hide the violence coiled in his frame, sat frozen in their seats. Damian had tried everything his world knew how to do. He demanded the flight attendants bring warmed formula at the precise temperature. He'd sent his associate to retrieve a $3,000 custom pacifier from the cargo hold. He'd even made a thinly veiled threat to have the pilot reroute the plane if someone didn't fix this. Nothing worked. The crying didn't just annoy him, it exposed him. Here was Damian Sarkis, a man who controlled entire territories with a phone call, who made grown men confess their sins with a single look, completely powerless against his own infant daughter. Every wail was a crack in the armor he'd spent decades forging. Every minute that passed was another moment his carefully orchestrated international transaction hung in the balance, his focus splintering, his legendary composure crumbling in front of witnesses who would never forget. The first-class cabin had become a pressure cooker of silent terror. Passengers didn't dare complain. They barely dared to breathe. Everyone understood that an irritated Damian Sarkis was exponentially more dangerous than a crying baby. That's when something unthinkable happened. A young black girl, maybe 15 or 16, emerged from the economy section and began walking up the aisle. Her clothes were clean but worn thin, her shoes held together with careful stitching. She carried herself with a quiet dignity that seemed completely out of place in the minefield of tension she was entering. She walked past the terrified flight attendants who had long since given up. She walked past the businessman who'd recognized Damian's face from an FBI briefing and had been silently praying for the flight to end. She walked straight up to seat 1A, where the most dangerous man on the plane sat holding a screaming child, his eyes dark with barely contained rage. Without asking permission, without introducing herself, the girl simply extended her hands toward the baby. "May I?" she asked softly, her young voice somehow cutting through the chaos. Damian's first instinct was to break her wrist for daring to reach toward his daughter. His associate halfway rose from his seat 2 rows back, hand moving toward his jacket. But something in the girl's eyes, an absolute absence of fear, a pure intention that Damian hadn't seen in another human being in 20 years, made him hesitate. He was so desperate, so utterly defeated by his own helplessness, that he simply nodded. The moment the girl's hands touched his daughter, something miraculous happened. The screaming stopped. Complete, absolute silence fell over the entire airplane cabin as 200 passengers held their breath in collective disbelief. Even the engine noise seemed to fade. The world contracted to this single impossible moment. The girl was holding the baby with a confidence that seemed to come from somewhere ancient and instinctive, her dark fingers gently applying pressure to the infant's back while she hummed something low and melodic, not quite a lullaby, not quite a song, but something in between that vibrated with an inexplicable power. The baby's eyes, which had been squeezed shut in distress for over 2 hours, slowly opened. For the first time since takeoff, she looked calm, peaceful. Her tiny fist unclenched and grasped the girl's finger. Damian stared at this mysterious teenager who had accomplished what force, money, and threats couldn't achieve. Around the cabin, passengers who had been paralyzed with fear now sat frozen with wonder. His own associate stood motionless, hand still halfway to his weapon, mouth slightly open in shock. "How did you?" Damian whispered, his voice hoarse from 2 hours of mounting frustration. The girl smiled gently, never taking her eyes off the baby. "I raised my 3 younger brothers and 4 neighbor kids when their mama couldn't. Babies cry like that when something inside them is all twisted up. You just gotta know where to touch, how to hold them so they feel safe." Damian looked at her properly for the first time. Beneath the poverty written in her patched jacket and carefully mended jeans, there was something extraordinary. An unshakable calm. A strength that had nothing to do with muscle or weapons or the capacity for violence. The kind of strength he'd spent his entire life trying to destroy in others because he'd never understood it. "Who are you?" he asked, the question carrying a weight it never had before. The teenager looked Damian directly in the eyes with a maturity that was startling, meeting his gaze without flinching, without the fear that had defined every interaction he'd had for the past 2 decades. "My name is Zia," she said quietly. "I'm 16. I'm from Southside, and I'm on my way to London because I saved up 3 years of babysitting money to visit my grandmother before she dies." Damian felt something shift in his chest, a tectonic movement in a landscape he'd thought was permanently frozen. This girl who had just saved his sanity, his daughter's comfort, and possibly his entire mission, wasn't a trained professional or someone seeking his favor. She was a teenager from one of the hardest neighborhoods in America who'd spent her childhood raising other people's children while her own childhood slipped away. But as Zia continued to hold his daughter, who was now making soft, contented sounds he'd never heard before, Damian had no idea that this chance encounter was about to unravel everything he'd built his identity on. And neither of them knew that what happened next would reveal truths about power, protection, and what it truly means to be strong that would threaten the very foundations of the empire Damian had constructed from blood and fear. Damian Sarkis was the 44-year-old head of the Sarkis organization, a criminal empire worth over $200 million that controlled everything from international shipping routes to politicians' voting records. And he had absolutely no idea how to handle the fact that a teenage girl with nothing had just given him something he couldn't buy, steal, or take by force. And since today starts a new month, take 1 second and subscribe. It helps a lot. Comment where you're watching from as we dive into the story now. Damian Sarkis looked scary. Really scary. He had pictures drawn all over his neck, tattoos that told stories about dangerous things he'd done. His expensive suit was perfect, but his face was red and angry. His baby girl had been crying for so long that everyone on the airplane wanted to cover their ears. But nobody moved. Nobody said a word. They just sat very still in their seats, hoping the scary man wouldn't notice them. Damian had tried everything to make his baby stop crying. He gave her a bottle. He changed her diaper 3 times. He even bought the most expensive baby toy from the flight attendant. Nothing worked. The baby just kept screaming and screaming. This made Damian feel something he never felt before: helpless. He was used to being in control of everything. When he wanted something, people gave it to him. When he told people to do something, they did it fast. But his own baby? She wouldn't listen. She just kept crying, and there was nothing he could do about it. The people on the plane weren't just annoyed. They were terrified. Some of them knew who Damian was. They'd seen his picture in the news. They knew he was someone you didn't want to make angry. And right now, he looked very, very angry. A businessman in seat 3C kept his eyes closed, pretending to sleep. A woman across the aisle held her magazine so tight her hands shook. Even the flight attendants stopped coming to first class. Nobody wanted to be near Damian when he was this upset. Then something incredible happened. A young girl came walking from the back of the plane. She looked about 15 or 16 years old. Her clothes were old and worn out, but they were clean. Her shoes had been fixed with thread many times. She walked slowly up the aisle, past all the scared grown-ups, straight toward the scariest man on the airplane. Damian's friend, sitting 2 rows behind him, started to stand up. His hand moved toward his jacket where he kept something dangerous. But the girl just kept walking. She wasn't running. She wasn't scared. She just walked calmly, like she was walking to school. When she reached Damian's seat, she stopped. She looked at the crying baby, then at Damian. Her eyes were kind and gentle. "May I?" she asked quietly. Damian stared at her. Who is this girl? Why wasn't she afraid of him? Everyone was afraid of him. But this skinny teenager with patches on her jacket just stood there, waiting patiently for his answer, her hands already reaching out toward his daughter. He was so tired, so frustrated, so completely out of ideas. Without thinking, he nodded. The girl picked up the baby and held her close. She put one hand on the baby's back and started humming a soft song. It wasn't a song Damian knew. It was something beautiful and gentle. And then silence. The baby stopped crying. Just like that. After 2.5 hours of nonstop screaming, there was suddenly no sound at all except the quiet hum of the airplane engines. Everyone in first class turned to look. Their mouths hung open in shock. Even Damian's dangerous friend forgot about his weapon and just stared. The baby opened her eyes. She looked at the girl's face and made a small, happy sound. Her tiny fingers wrapped around the girl's thumb. She looked peaceful and calm, like she'd been waiting for this girl all along. Damian couldn't believe what he was seeing. This stranger, this poor teenager from the cheap seats in the back, had just done something impossible. "How did you do that?" he whispered. The girl smiled. "Babies just need to feel safe," she said simply. "Sometimes you gotta hold them a special way." Damian watched his daughter sleep peacefully in Zia's arms, something she hadn't done since they'd boarded the plane hours ago. His mind was working fast, calculating, planning. In his line of work, when you found something valuable, you secured it immediately before someone else did. "How long are you staying in London?" he asked suddenly. Zia looked surprised by the question. 5 days. That's all I could afford. I have to be back for school and my shifts at the corner store. You work at a store too? Yes, sir. After school, 3 days a week. I send most of the money back home to my mama. Damian was quiet for a moment, his fingers drumming on the armrest. His associate 2 rows back was watching him carefully, recognizing that look on his boss's face. It was the look Damian got right before he made a move that changed everything. "I need to make you an offer," Damian said finally, his voice dropping even lower so only Zia could hear. "My daughter responds to you in a way she doesn't respond to anyone else, including me. I have important business in London, very important business that requires my complete focus. I can't do that if she's screaming for hours like she was today." Zia shifted uncomfortably. "Sir, I don't." $25,000, Damian interrupted. "Cash. I'll give you $25,000 to be my daughter's caregiver for the 5 days we're both in London. You'll stay with us, take care of her, keep her calm. That's all." Zia's eyes went wide. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. $25,000 was more money than her mama made in an entire year working 3 jobs. That's too much," she finally whispered. "I can't." "It's not too much," Damian said firmly. "Not for what I need. My daughter's comfort, my peace of mind, my ability to handle my business without distraction, that's worth far more than $25,000 to me." Zia looked down at the baby in her arms, then back at Damian. Her mind was racing. $25,000 could pay off the medical bills from when her brother broke his arm. It could fix the broken heater in their apartment. It could buy her mama a whole month off work to rest. It could pay for books and supplies for her brother's school. Maybe even help with grandmother's medicine. "I'd still get to see my grandmother," she asked quietly. "We'll make it work. I'll have my driver take you to visit her. Whatever you need." Zia bit her lip, clearly overwhelmed. Everything in her life had taught her that when something seemed too good to be true, it usually was. But she looked at this dangerous man holding out a lifeline to both of them, him needing her help, her needing his money, and realized that sometimes miracles came in unexpected packages. "Okay," she said softly. "I'll do it." Damian nodded once, satisfied. He pulled out his phone and typed a quick message to his associate. Within seconds, the man appeared beside them. "Marcus, this is Zia. She'll be staying with us in London. Make the arrangements. Private room at the hotel, separate from the main suite. And get me $25,000 in cash before we land." Marcus looked confused for just a moment before his professional mask slipped back into place. "Yes, sir." As Marcus walked away, Damian turned back to Zia. "You'll be safe. No one in my organization will bother you or disrespect you. You have my word." Zia nodded, still processing what had just happened. 5 minutes ago, she'd simply wanted to help a crying baby. Now she was holding that baby while her father, a man who clearly lived in a world Zia had only seen in movies, had just offered her enough money to change her family's life. She looked down at the sleeping infant and whispered, "What did you just get me into, little one?" The black SUV that picked them up at the London airport was bigger than Zia's entire living room back home. The seats were made of leather so soft it felt like butter, and the windows were tinted so dark she could barely see outside. Two men sat in the front, both wearing suits with suspicious bulges under their jackets. Neither one smiled. Damian sat across from her, typing rapidly on his phone while his daughter slept in the car seat. Zia was watching carefully. Every few minutes, his eyes would flick up to check on them both before returning to his screen. "Where are we going?" Zia asked quietly. "A private estate outside the city." "It's secure," Damian answered without looking up. "You'll have your own room, your own bathroom. Anything you need, you ask Marcus." The Marcus he'd pointed to earlier, the man with the cold eyes and the gun she'd definitely seen when his jacket shifted, nodded at her from the front passenger seat. Zia swallowed hard and looked out the window at London passing by in a blur. When they arrived at the estate, Zia's breath caught in her throat. The house wasn't a house at all. It was a mansion with iron gates, stone walls, and men in dark suits stationed at every entrance. Security cameras pointed in every direction like mechanical eyes that never blinked. Inside was even more intimidating. Everything was expensive: crystal chandeliers, marble floors, paintings in heavy gold frames, but nothing felt warm. Nothing felt like a home. It felt like a museum where people weren't supposed to touch anything. The furniture looked like no one had ever sat on it. The kitchen gleamed like no one had ever cooked a real meal there. "Your room is upstairs, third door on the left," Damian said, handing the baby to her. "The nursery is next to it. Everything you need for her is already there. If you need anything else, press the button by the door and someone will come." Zia nodded and carried the baby upstairs, feeling the eyes of armed guards following her every step. Her room was bigger than the entire apartment she shared with her mama and brothers. The bed had more pillows than she'd ever seen in one place. The bathroom had a bathtub the size of a small pool. But despite all the luxury, Zia felt cold. She could feel the violence hovering in this place like a thick fog. It was in the way the guards stood too still, too alert. It was in the hushed, serious conversations happening behind closed doors. It was in the way Damian's jaw clenched when his phone buzzed with certain messages. This was a world built on fear and control, and she was now living right in the middle of it. That evening, Zia sat in the nursery, rocking the baby and humming softly. Through the open door, she could hear Damian in his office down the hall, his voice sharp and threatening as he spoke to someone in a language she didn't understand. The words were foreign, but the tone was universal. Someone was in trouble. She held the baby a little tighter and kept humming, her gentle song a strange contrast to the danger echoing through the expensive halls. A guard walked past the nursery and paused, looking in at her. He was a big man with scars on his knuckles and a permanent skull. But as he watched Zia rock the baby, something in his expression softened just slightly. He stood there for a moment longer than necessary before continuing his patrol, and Zia could have sworn she saw the hint of a sad smile on his face. Over the next 2 days, she noticed it happening more and more. The guards who paced the hallways would slow down when they passed the nursery. The men who came for intense meetings with Damian would lower their voices when they saw her walking by with the baby. Marcus, the cold-eyed associate, actually held a door open for her and said, "After you, miss," in a voice that was almost gentle. Even Damian himself seemed different when he was near her. His shoulders would relax just slightly. His voice would lose some of its edge. He'd watch her care for his daughter with an expression Zia couldn't quite name, something between wonder and sadness, like he was seeing something beautiful that he'd forgotten existed. Zia didn't try to change anyone. She didn't preach or judge. She simply existed in this dark world with her quiet grace, caring for a baby with the same gentle love she'd given to dozens of children before. Completely unaware that her presence was cracking something open in this house of violence that had been sealed shut for years. On the third morning, Zia came downstairs carrying the baby to find 3 of Damian's most dangerous men sitting in the kitchen. These were the kind of men who made other criminals nervous. Victor with his broken nose and dead eyes, Chin who never spoke, but whose hands were registered as weapons in 4 countries, and Marcus, who seemed to be Damian's right hand in everything dark and terrible. They all looked up when she entered, and the conversation stopped immediately. "Good morning," Zia said softly, shifting the baby to her hip. "Is it okay if I make her a bottle?" Victor, the man who'd allegedly made 3 people disappear in one night, stood up quickly. "I'll get it," he said, his Russian accent thick. "You sit. What temperature?" Just warm." "Not hot," Zia said, surprised. She watched as this giant of a man, whose knuckles were covered in scars from violence, carefully tested the formula temperature on his wrist the way she'd shown one of the other guards yesterday. He brought it to her with hands that could break bones, but held the bottle like it was made of glass. "Thank you," Zia said, smiling at him. Victor's scarred face did something it probably hadn't done in years. It smiled back. Just barely, just for a second, but it was there. Chin, who never spoke, reached over and gently adjusted the blanket around the baby's feet. Then he went back to cleaning his gun like nothing had happened. Later that afternoon, Zia was walking through the hallway when she heard angry shouting from Damian's office. A man was pleading in Italian, his voice high with panic. She couldn't understand the words, but she understood fear when she heard it. She paused outside the door, the baby cooing softly against her shoulder. The shouting stopped abruptly. The door opened, and a man stumbled out, his face pale and sweating. He nearly ran into Zia, mumbled an apology, and hurried away. Damian appeared in the doorway, his expression dark and dangerous. But when he saw Zia standing there with his daughter, something shifted in his face. The hardness softened. The violence in his eyes dimmed. "Is she okay?" he asked quietly. "She's perfect," Zia answered. "Just wanted to walk around a bit. She likes seeing new things." Damian looked at his daughter, then at Zia, then back at his daughter. "Come in for a minute," he said, stepping aside. Zia hesitated, but walked into his office. It was all dark wood and leather, with maps on the walls and phones that looked too complicated to be normal phones. Damian sat down heavily in his chair and rubbed his face with both hands. He suddenly looked tired, not just physically tired, but soul tired. The kind of tired that comes from carrying heavy things for too long. "You're good with her," he said finally. "Better than anyone I've ever hired." "Better than." He trailed off, and Zia realized he was thinking about someone. Maybe the baby's mother. "She's easy to love," Zia said simply. Damian looked up at her sharply. "Is she?" "Of course. All babies are." "I'm not," Damian said quietly, almost to himself. He stared at his hands covered in expensive rings and old scars. "I'm not easy to love. I'm not good like you. I've done things." He stopped, his jaw clenching. Zia sat down slowly, still holding the baby. She didn't know what to say, so she said what she felt. "You love her. I can see it. That's good. That matters." "Does it?" Damian's laugh was bitter. "Does it matter that I love her if I'm teaching her to live in a world built on fear? If every person who comes near her is either afraid of me or wants to use her to get to me? If the only way I know how to protect her is through violence?" The baby reached out toward Damian, making happy noises. Without thinking, he extended his finger, and she grabbed it with her tiny fist. "She doesn't see the scary parts," Zia said softly. "She just sees her daddy. Maybe that's what matters most." Damian stared at his daughter holding his finger, the same finger that had pulled triggers and signed death warrants. In that moment, Something cracked open inside him that had been locked tight for decades. "How do you do it?" he asked. "How do you stay gentle in a world this cruel?" Zia thought about her 3 jobs, her absent mother, raising babies while she was still a child herself. "I guess I just decided that the world has enough hard things in it. Maybe I could be a soft place for someone to land." The call came at 3 in the morning. Zia woke to the sound of heavy footsteps running through the hallways, urgent voices speaking in hushed, rapid tones. She sat up in bed, her heart pounding, and listened to the mansion come alive with a dark energy she hadn't felt before. Down the hall, she heard Damian's voice, cold, sharp, deadly. He was giving orders in that tone that made grown men flinch. She checked on the baby in the nursery next door. Still sleeping peacefully, unaware that the air around her had suddenly filled with violence. By sunrise, the mansion had transformed into something that looked like a war room. Men Zia had never seen before arrived in black cars with tinted windows. They carried metal briefcases and spoke in codes she didn't understand. The regular guards were joined by others, harder men with colder eyes and bigger guns. Zia stayed upstairs with the baby, but she could feel everything changing below her. At breakfast, Marcus brought her a tray of food. His face was grim, and there was a new gun holster visible under his jacket. "What's happening?" Zia asked quietly. Marcus hesitated, then said, "The meeting Mr. Sarkis came to London for, we got information that it's a setup. An ambush. People want him dead, and they're planning to make it happen tomorrow night." Zia's stomach dropped. "Can't he just cancel it? Not go?" "That's not how this world works," Marcus said flatly. "If he doesn't show, he looks weak. If he looks weak, everyone will come for him. For his business. He glanced at the baby. For everything he cares about." After Marcus left, Zia held the baby closer and looked out the window at the guards patrolling the grounds. There were twice as many now, and they all carried rifles. That afternoon, Damian called her to his office. When she walked in, she barely recognized the room. Maps covered every surface. Laptops showed building layouts and security camera feeds. Weapons were laid out on the desk, guns, knives, things Zia didn't have names for. 5 men stood around the table, all of them radiating the kind of danger that made the hair on Zia's arms stand up. They stopped talking when she entered. "Zia," Damian said, his voice hard and businesslike, nothing like the softer tone he'd used with her yesterday. "I need you to keep my daughter upstairs tomorrow night. Don't leave the nursery for any reason. Marcus will be posted outside your door. If anything goes wrong—" "Nothing will go wrong," Victor interrupted, his accent thick with confidence. "We kill them all before they kill us. Simple." Chin nodded and made a slicing motion across his throat. Damian turned back to the maps. "We go in with 3 teams. Victor, you take the north entrance. Chin, the south. I'll come through the main with Marcus. We neutralize the threat before they know we're there." "Body count," one of the men asked casually, like he was asking about the weather. "However many it takes," Damian answered coldly. "I want a message sent. Anyone who thinks they can move against me needs to understand the cost." Zia stood frozen, holding the baby, watching this man she'd seen smile at his daughter now plan out violence with the efficiency of someone scheduling a business meeting. "The weapons shipment arrives in 2 hours, Marcus said, pointing to the timeline on the wall. "We'll have everything we need." "Good." Damian finally looked at Zia, and for just a second, she saw something flicker in his eyes, maybe regret, maybe shame. But it disappeared quickly, replaced by cold determination. "You should go back upstairs now. Keep her safe. That's all you need to worry about." Zia nodded and left, but as she climbed the stairs, she could hear their voices growing louder, angrier, more violent. They were planning to hurt people. Maybe kill people. And Damian, the same man who'd held his daughter so gently yesterday, was leading it all. That night, the mansion felt like a bomb waiting to explode. Nobody smiled. Nobody whispered softly anymore. The gentle touches that had started appearing were gone, replaced by clenched fists and checked weapons. Zia sat in the dark nursery, rocking the sleeping baby, and wondered how something so innocent could exist in a world so full of darkness. The next evening arrived too quickly. Damian stood in his office surrounded by his men, all of them dressed in black and armed to the teeth. The plan was final. In 2 hours, they would drive to the meeting location and turn it into a bloodbath before their enemies could do the same to them. Everyone knows their positions? Damian asked, checking his own gun one more time. Yes, sir, Victor answered. We go in hard and fast. No survivors. No survivors, Damian repeated, his voice ice cold. Marcus handed him a second weapon. The cars are ready. We leave in 30 minutes. Damian nodded and walked to the window, looking out at the dark London sky. His reflection stared back at him, a man who'd built an empire on fear and violence, who'd survived by being more ruthless than everyone else, who'd never hesitated to do whatever was necessary. That's when he heard it. Soft and gentle, floating down the hallway from upstairs, Zia's voice, humming that melody she always hummed when she put the baby to sleep. It was the same tune she'd used on the airplane, the one that had stopped his daughter's crying and changed everything. The sound drifted into his office like a whisper from another world, a world where people solved problems with kindness instead of bullets. Damian closed his eyes and listened. He could picture Zia up there in the nursery, rocking his daughter with that infinite patience, that gentle strength that came from somewhere he didn't understand. She'd probably stayed up there all day, keeping the baby calm and happy while he and his men prepared for war just 2 floors below. Boss? Marcus said. You okay? Damian opened his eyes and looked at the weapons on his desk, at the maps marked with entry points and kill zones, at the men waiting for his order to go out and paint the night red. Then he thought about coming back here afterward. Coming back with blood on his hands, literally, and walking upstairs to see his daughter. Would Zia look at him differently? Would his daughter somehow sense what he'd done, even though she was too young to understand? And what happened when his daughter got older? When she could understand? Would he have to explain that Daddy solved problems by killing people? That the only way he knew how to protect the things he loved was through violence? Sir? Victor asked, checking his watch. We need to move soon. Damian turned around slowly and looked at each of his men. They were ready. They were willing. They would follow him into hell if he asked them to. But suddenly, that didn't seem like strength anymore. It seemed like the easy way out. New plan, Damian said quietly. Everyone froze. What? Marcus asked, confused. I said new plan. Damian's voice was stronger now, more certain. We're not going in shooting. We're going to be smarter than that. Victor's scarred face twisted in confusion. Boss, they're planning to kill you. We can't just. Yes, we can. Damian walked back to the table and started moving papers around, his mind working differently now, faster and clearer. They're expecting violence. They're expecting me to come in like I always do, loud and bloody. So we don't give them what they expect. He looked up at his men and saw Zia's face in his mind, saw her holding his daughter with those gentle hands that had never hurt anyone. We use intelligence instead of bullets, Damian continued. We expose them. We ruin them financially, legally, publicly. We take everything from them without firing a single shot. It'll take longer, but it'll last forever. That's not our way, Chen said, one of the few times anyone had heard him speak. Maybe it should be, Damian said, and he was surprised to find he actually meant it. Maybe there's more than one kind of power. Marcus stared at his boss like he was looking at a stranger. Who are you right now? Damian thought about that question. 3 days ago, he would have laughed at this version of himself. But 3 days ago, he hadn't watched a 16-year-old girl with nothing teach him that real strength didn't need weapons. I'm a father, Damian said finally. And I want my daughter to know a different kind of man than the one I've been. Upstairs, Zia's humming continued, completely unaware that she'd just stopped a war without saying a single word. For the next 48 hours, Damian's office transformed from a war room into something that looked more like a high-tech laboratory. Computer experts replaced armed soldiers. Financial analysts sat where gunmen had stood. Instead of planning entry points and kill zones, they mapped money trails and digital footprints. Zia watched from the doorway as Damian worked, his intensity unchanged, but his methods completely different. He barely slept, barely ate, but there was something new in his eyes, focus without fury, determination without destruction. "We've traced the money," Marcus announced on the second night, pointing at a screen filled with numbers and connections. Every payment, every account, every person involved. "It all leads back to Konstantin Volkov." Damian nodded slowly. "The Russian. I should have known." "He's been planning this for months," Victor added, scrolling through hacked emails. "He wanted to take over your shipping routes, your contacts, everything. Killing you at the meeting was just step one." "What's step two?" Damian asked. "There is no step two," Chen said with a rare smile. "Because we have everything. Bank records, video footage, recorded conversations. Every crime he's committed, every law he's broken, every person he's betrayed." Damian leaned back in his chair, a different kind of satisfaction spreading across his face. "Send it all to Interpol. Every document, every recording. Then send copies to his partners, his suppliers, his competitors. Let them all know exactly who Konstantin Volkov really is." "They'll tear him apart," Marcus said. "His own people will destroy him." "Good." Damian stood and stretched, his neck cracking. "And make sure our business contacts know we handled this without violence. Without casualties. That sends a different kind of message, that we're smarter than our enemies, not just more brutal." Over the next 24 hours, Konstantin Volkov's entire empire collapsed. Interpol arrested him at his estate in Moscow based on evidence so thorough and damning that even his expensive lawyers couldn't help him. His business partners abandoned him. His money was frozen. His reputation was destroyed. And Damian never fired a single shot. The morning after it was all over, Damian finally came upstairs to the nursery. Zia was feeding the baby, who was babbling happily and grabbing at her nose. "It's done," Damian said quietly, leaning against the doorframe. He looked exhausted but somehow lighter, like he'd put down something heavy he'd been carrying for years. "No one got hurt?" Zia asked. "No one got hurt," Damian confirmed. "Well, Volkov's pride got hurt pretty badly. And his bank account. But no blood. No bodies." Zia smiled. "That's good." "It's strange," Damian said, walking closer and sitting down beside them. "I thought it would feel less satisfying, winning without violence. But it actually feels better. Cleaner. Like I proved something I didn't know I needed to prove." His daughter reached for him, and he took her carefully, holding her against his chest. She immediately grabbed his tie and started chewing on it, completely content. "You proved you're smart," Zia said simply. "Everyone already knew you were dangerous. Now they know you're dangerous and smart. That's scarier." Damian laughed, a real laugh that Zia had never heard before. "When did you get so wise?" "I'm not wise. I just pay attention." Zia stood and stretched. "I should pack. My flight back is tomorrow morning." The smile faded from Damian's face. "Right. Of course." They sat in silence for a moment, both of them suddenly aware that this strange arrangement was ending. In 5 days, Zia had somehow become part of this household in a way that no one expected. "The money will be in your account by tonight," Damian said. 25,000, as promised." "Thank you," Zia said quietly. "It's going to change everything for my family." Damian looked down at his daughter, who was now falling asleep against his shoulder, completely trusting, completely safe. "You changed everything for mine too," he said. "You just don't realize how much." That night, Zia packed her small bag and said goodbye to the guards who'd become almost friendly, to Marcus who'd made sure she had everything she needed, to Victor who'd learned to make bottles at the perfect temperature. But mostly, she wondered if a mafia boss and his baby would remember the poor girl from Southside who'd taught them both that there was more than one way to be strong. Zia stood in the mansion's grand entrance hall the next morning, her small patched bag at her feet, waiting for the car that would take her to the airport. She'd already said goodbye to the baby, who'd cried a little when Zia handed her to the nanny Damian had hired, a kind older woman with gentle eyes who reminded Zia of her own grandmother. Damian came down the stairs carrying an envelope. He was back in his tailored suit, his tattoos visible at his collar, but something about him seemed different now. Softer around the edges, maybe. Or just more human. "Your payment," he said, handing her the envelope. Zia took it carefully. "Thank you. Really. This money is going to—" "Open it," Damian interrupted. Confused, Zia opened the envelope. Inside was a check, but when she looked at the number, her hands started shaking. It wasn't $25,000. It was $250,000. "This is wrong," she whispered. "This is—" You added a zero. "This is too much." "It's not enough," Damian said firmly. "But it's what I can give you right now without you refusing it completely." Zia looked up at him with tears in her eyes. "I don't understand." Damian sat down on the stairs, gesturing for her to sit beside him. When she did, he spoke quietly, choosing his words carefully. 5 days ago, I was about to kill 6 people. Maybe more. I was going to walk into that meeting and turn it into a massacre because that's the only way I knew how to solve problems. That's who I've been for 20 years, a man who ruled through fear and violence. He paused, his jaw tightening. But then I heard you upstairs, humming to my daughter, and I realized something. If I went through with that plan, I'd have to come home and look at you. Look at her. And I'd have to know that I chose the easy, brutal path instead of the harder, better one. You're not a bad person, Zia said softly. I'm not a good person either, Damian replied honestly. But maybe I can be a better father. And that money isn't just payment for watching my daughter. It's payment for showing me a different way to be strong. Zia wiped her eyes. What am I supposed to do with this much money? Damian pulled out another envelope, this one thicker. I took the liberty of having my people research a few things. There's a full scholarship waiting for you at 3 different universities, your choice. There's enough money to pay off your family's debts, fix your apartment, and give your mama a year off work if she wants it. And there's a college fund set up for each of your brothers. Zia's tears were falling freely now. Why would you do this? Because 5 days ago, you saw a crying baby and a struggling father, and you helped without asking for anything in return. You didn't see a criminal. You didn't see danger. You just saw someone who needed kindness. Damian's voice cracked slightly. No one's looked at me like that in 20 years. Like I was just a person who needed help. Marcus appeared in the doorway. Car's ready, boss. But Damian held up his hand. One more thing. He pulled out a business card and pressed it into Zia's hand. This is my private number. Not my business line, my personal phone. If you or your family ever need anything, and I mean anything, you call me. Medical emergency, trouble at school, someone threatening your brothers, doesn't matter. You call and I'll handle it. I can't accept. You already did, Damian said with a small smile. The moment you walked up that airplane aisle and touched my daughter, you became part of this family. And I protect my family. I just learned there's more than one way to do that. Zia stood, and without thinking, she hugged him. Damian stiffened for a moment, probably not used to being hugged, then slowly put his arms around her and hugged her back. Thank you, she whispered. For everything. No, Damian said quietly. Thank you. You saved more than my daughter's comfort that day. You saved something in me I thought was dead. As Zia's car pulled away from the mansion, she looked back to see Damian standing at the entrance, holding his daughter, waving goodbye. The guards around him were smiling, actually smiling, and the whole scene looked less like a fortress and more like a home. 3 months later, Zia started her first semester at university, studying child psychology. Her mama quit 2 of her 3 jobs. Her brothers had new school supplies and full bellies. Their apartment had heat for the first time in years. And back in London, Damian Sarkis was building a different kind of legacy, one where his daughter would grow up knowing that her father's greatest strength wasn't his capacity for violence, but his capacity for change. All because a poor 16-year-old girl had dared to help when no one else would, and in doing so, had shown a dangerous man that the bravest thing he could do was choose gentleness over fear. If this story touched your heart, please subscribe before you go. This Christmas season is all about kindness, courage, and the people who show up when no one else will. Your support helps me keep creating stories like this, stories that remind us of the goodness still left in the world. And I'd love to hear from you. Drop a comment below and tell me what part of this story hit you the most. Let's spread love and share moments that matter this Christmas.